Chapter 7: The Power of the Success Story. At an insurance convention in Atlanta some time ago, I shared the speaker's platform with Mr. Lee Iacocca, chairman of the board at Chrysler Corporation. The auto industry was in a slump at the time, and no one was sure if Chrysler would survive. Mr. Iacocca's address was entitled, "So You Think You've Got Troubles?" He talked for 60 minutes, and it was a stirring speech. Frequently interrupted by applause, he related how Chrysler had cut their white-collar staff from 40,000 to 20,000 and yet was producing more cars than any time in the last 3 years. And finally, they were making a modest profit again. It was rags to riches story on a corporate scale. I returned to my hotel, strangely stirred and energized. My work is not at all similar to Mr. Iacocca's. He is head of a large automaker in Detroit, and I am a psychotherapist and writer in Los Angeles. Yet Mr. Iacocca's story of success made me feel like attacking my work with renewed zest and dedication. An important psychological principle was at work there in Atlanta. Success stories have a significant ability to motivate us. So rule number 6 for bringing out the best in people is, employ models to encourage success. Great persuaders have always been good storytellers, for they have known that we are more easily influenced by individualized examples and experiences than by general principles. Morton Hunt says that his doctor once advised him to take a certain drug for a medical problem. He asked if it was dangerous. The doctor outlined the evidence, says Hunt, and I felt reassured. Then he added, I take it myself, and I was persuaded. David J. Buon, a psychologist who is head of his own communications training firm in Redondo Beach, California, has shown that successful salespeople use realistic examples to show the listener that another individual has made the choice he or she is being urged to make. If I'm looking at a new car and the dealer tells me about several recent customers who have purchased the car we're looking at, it pumps a certain heightened interest into the exchange. Stories of other people convince us because they appeal to our hearts rather than to our heads. They have the ability to stir out feelings powerfully and to change our attitudes. And when it's all said and done, the art of motivation is the heightening of emotion. It is appealing to the unconscious more than the conscious, to the right side of the brain more than to the left. Political scientist James McGregor Burns, in his Pulitzer Prize-winning book Leadership, comments on the uncanny power of Chairman Mao Zedong, whose true genius, he says, was in understanding the emotions of others. And the best way to appeal to the emotions is by talking about people, their struggles, conflicts, and eventual triumphs. The Bible is an emotionally stirring book, in part because it is filled with the drama of people's lives. To a large extent, it is a collection of biographies of flesh and blood people, and its doctrines are effectively passed on in these gripping accounts. Modern journalism uses much of the same approach. The Reader's Digest, People, Guidepost, even the famous New Yorker profile, all appeal to the same instinct in us. We want to know about the lives of other people. The legendary hero. Most movements and organizations seem to flourish best when they have some strong figure who embodies certain principles, and from those whose principles can filter down. People such as Thomas Watson Sr. of IBM, A.P. Giannini of Bank of America, Mary Kay Ash of Mary Kay Cosmetics, or Ken Olsen of DEC take on mystic proportions. And according to the experts on management, these legends are very important because they convey the organization's shared values of culture. Charles Steinmetz of General Electric is a good illustration. A crippled Austrian immigrant, Steinmetz came as a young man to America and worked in Thomas Edison's laboratory. He was responsible for dozens of inventions still used by GE and other companies. But Steinmetz is revered for other reasons. When young engineers joined the company, he would invite them to his home for the weekend in order to learn what kind of people they are. Once he even adopted a GE engineer as his son and let the entire family move in with them. Such stories circulated through the company's informal but powerful communications network helped perpetuate GE's philosophy of fair treatment for all employees. Moreover, the specter of such leadership helps inspire excellence. A consultant working with GE was once driven past the lab where Charles Steinmetz had conducted his experiments. Sometimes I get the feeling that I can still see the lights on in there, and Steinmetz is working away, the driver said. For that man and for other employees who never knew Steinmetz, he was still a strong influence and served as a reminder of the inventiveness that GE holds as a core value of its corporate culture. School cultures are constructed in the same way. Coaches have always known that they could get a grip on a team by talking about some of the school's earlier athletes, like the legendary "Win one for the Gipper." Teachers would do well to use similar biography in their lectures, telling about successful students from the past, and even bringing such graduates into class sessions can be potent motivation. Teachers might find that their students would learn more if they occasionally forgot about covering material and instead put into their students' minds pictures of such persons as Lincoln with his books before the fireplace or Madame Curie with her instruments in the laboratory. Families do well to inspire their younger members by continuing to keep alive the records of earlier generations. In the last 3 decades before she died, my grandmother devoted much of her energy to writing the stories of her buffalo hunter father, Frank J. Brown, and she even had 2 books published, primarily for the benefit of the dozens of cousins and great-grandchildren. Some of us in the family thought she was unduly obsessed with these endeavors, but now that I'm older, I realize how much her father's life and ideals have influenced my thinking. I find myself going back to her books in order to get a better idea of who I am, and I find myself more determined than ever to carry on those traditions. Harry Truman was once asked how he could account for his success in politics. He pointed to several pictures of his family ancestors on the wall and said gruffly, "I come from good stock, and I've got a lot to live up to." There's something ennobling about being able to reach back to solid roots and imparting to your families the conviction that they are pursuing some unfinished dreams from the past. The contemporary hero. In addition to the legendary heroes we've been discussing, there is another type of success story. The good motivator finds contemporary role models to hold up to the group. In fact, this is one of the most effective ways of showing employees what the boss wants done. Let us say that Procter & Gamble is about to face stiff competition in a certain market, and the sales manager has decided that a more aggressive approach is in order. It would be possible to send out a memo to that effect, or to make a speech on the subject at a sales meeting, but Procter & Gamble knows that the message will be communicated far more dramatically by finding some salesman out in the field who is doing exactly what they want done, bringing him in and applauding the fellow's aggressive salesmanship, slapping him on the back, and writing him up as Salesman of the Month in the company newspaper. The obvious message is emulate him, and the message will come through more clearly than any memo announcing a new corporate strategy. Looking back upon the dinner conversations with which I grew up, I now see how effectively my father used heroes to motivate his sons. A thoughtful, soft-spoken man, it would never enter his mind to lecture us about excelling or studying hard at school, but at the dinner table, he did comment upon the people in our small town who he admired, a businessman who was going to law school at night, or a young farmer who was taking correspondence classes. He wanted to be sure that we noticed these people. Both my brother and I went on to get doctoral degrees, and looking back, now I see how strongly our father propelled us toward success. He did what all effective managers and teachers do. He gave us strong values by holding up flesh and blood people who embodied those values. If he can do it, so can you. When our leader exposes us to successful people, it not only inculcates certain values, it also convinces us that if they can achieve, so can we. Seeing another succeed somehow inspires us to succeed. For 9 years, the record of the mile hovered just above 4 minutes. As early as 1945, Gunder Haig had approached the barrier with a time of 4:01.4, but many people said that the limit of physical capacity had been reached and that it was impossible to break the barrier. Then, in 1954, Roger Bannister broke the tape at 3:59.4, and what was the result? As soon as the myth of the impossible barrier was dispelled, the 4-minute mile was attacked and pierced by many with apparent ease. In almost no time, the 4-minute achievement was bettered 66 times by 26 different men. If one dismisses this as merely the power of competition, an important motivational point will be missed. There was just as much competition before the 4-minute mile was broken. What the succeeding runners discovered from Bannister was that it could be done. An achievement previously thought impossible was now accessible, and this concrete evidence that success was within reach inspired them on to better and better records. If you visit a meeting of Mary Kay organization, you will see this principle applied again and again. A crowd of people will sit up in apt attention hour after hour to get more and more inspired simply by listening to success stories. People walk up to the microphone and recount their struggles and their triumphs. The message sounds like a refrain. If we did it, you can do it too. They show slides of their new homes and luxury cars, and they tell basically the same story. We came from nothing. You can do the same simply by believing hard enough and working hard enough. Terence E. Deal and Alan A. Kennedy, in their splendid book Corporate Cultures, explains the phenomenon very well. Heroes are symbolic figures whose deeds are out of the ordinary, but not too far out. They show how often dramatically that the idea of success lies within human capacity. The Optimist of Fifth Avenue. I have always wondered why some churches are successful and others are not. Why some pastors are able to send their congregations away inspired and hopeful when others seem unable to have that effect. Many intellectuals have been less than charitable toward popularizers of religions, such as Norman Vincent Peale, criticizing them for being blindly optimistic, ignoring the presence of tragedy and suffering in the world. But the longer I have sat in my counseling room and listened to people tell how they're in over their heads and sometimes feel as if they're going down for the third time, and the more I've realized that no one can ignore tragedy even when they try, and that everyone needs some place to go once a week where they are picked up, given the long view, and strengthened with renewed hope. So when I was in New York one cold December Sunday last year, I decided to go to Marble Collegate Church and sample a sermon by the father of possibility thinking, Dr. Peale himself. People had been standing in the rain of Fifth Avenue for more than an hour to be sure of getting a seat, but no one seemed to mind. Once inside, we sang the old hymns with gusto and listened to other ministers read from the Bible. Then, when it was time for the sermon, Dr. Peale walked slowly to the pulpit. He was 86, had been presiding there for over 51 years, and the years seemed to tell. I thought to myself, why doesn't he retire? But when he reached the side of the pulpit, leaned his elbow on the top, and began to speak, I saw why his congregation wouldn't allow him to retire. It was as if someone had turned on a switch. He pulled himself erect, his eyes came alive, and out came a powerful sermon about worry and the spiritual principles which can help us deal with doubt. Story after story rolled out about people who had overcome their handicaps with God's help. When it was over and we filed out, all of us seemed to walk out with our shoulders back and our heads held a little higher. Later I told Peale how touched I had been by his sermon and how I admired his technique of piling up success stories to make a point. He brushed my compliments aside with the demeanor that he did little more than ramble in his sermons nowadays. But then he paused a moment, and he pondered the question of the stories. Well, he said, people used to criticize me for telling so many positive anecdotes. Come to think of it, I haven't been attacked for that in a long time. Maybe I'm slipping, he said with a twinkle. But I try to use biographies of great people in my preaching because nothing in the Bible says we're supposed to rehearse failure, and the best way I know to motivate people is to show them how other men and women just like them with similar problems to theirs have been overcomers. What we have been discussing in this chapter is far more than a mere modeling. What we are after is an atmosphere of enthusiasm and hope, and that can be communicated best with stories of people. David Kolb, professor of management at Case Western Reserve University, summarizes it this way. If I see people around me succeeding, I will stimulate my desire to succeed. In the chapter that follows, I will offer some specific suggestions on helping people move from small successes to even larger ones.